Alright, Geordie Prepper here. Welcome to another Prepper News video. Today's the 10th of February 2024. Ukraine's new army chief has started his job after the old one was given the boot, and he's basically laid out his plans to effectively change and shake up their military. He's wanting to use the use of high-tech weapons. Now, obviously, we know where he's going to get these from if he does in fact instigate this change. If the allies that are supplying these weapons are going to be willing to give them to him. So really, I mean, he's a guy who's really dependent on so many other sources and weapons and ammunition and everything. Must be a really constrained job. He's probably going to get very frustrated. He's initially going to improve the rotation of troops at the front lines. One thing of note that this article mentions, however, is the shortage of manpower. This has helped to lower morale substantially. He's definitely got some big shoes to fill, so I guess we'll just have to see how long he lasts. As I've mentioned in a previous video, with all this war and conflict going on around the world, it's easy to forget other people who are suffering, and UNICEF is warning that over 700,000 children in Sudan are facing malnutrition. They're asking for $840 million in help. It'd be interesting to see if they actually give this funding for this purpose ahead of funding for wars and everything else that's happening right now. There's a 10-month war in Sudan between its armed forces and paramilitary rapid support forces. This has led to infrastructure damage and basically millions of displaced people facing famine. They've also suffered worse. And moving on to what's happening in Gaza, Egypt's being a very big promoter of getting the two sides in the Gaza conflict together, and they're being very proactive about holding talks. Recent talks that were going to start, Israel apparently didn't send their delegation because they just simply found that Hamas's proposals were just too much. Division is just too big to breach. But Egypt's been a very big broker in talks. It obviously sees the benefit in the conflict ending because the whole reason for the Houthis attacking ships in the Red Sea is because they don't want support going to Israel to continue the war in Gaza. So if that war comes to an end, no more support to Israel, Israel's not actively in conflict in that region, then ships can start going through the Suez Canal again, which benefits Egypt. So I think that's the big motivator behind Egypt beginning talks and continuation of talks between the sides. But it looks like conflict's going to continue at least for quite a long time because Israel's trying to evacuate Rafah at the minute, and it's obviously wanting to try and get as many civilians out of the way before they do their ground offensive. There's been heavy international criticism over the amount of civilian deaths so far and the conditions of the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip whilst this operation's been continuing. Netanyahu has basically rebuffed a lot of that criticism, and there's definitely some growing friction between the United States and Israel over this conflict. We're seeing it more and more, and they could have taken other steps before actually going into the physical kinetic confrontation. And I saw this mentioned by Canadian Prepper, the Iran threat Geiger counter. Areas which are looked at in Iran which gauges this meter here. We've got to remember, people have been talking about threat and danger from Iran for 20, 30 years. They've been saying for 20, 30 years, Iran's definitely 2, 3, 6 months away from getting a nuclear weapon. But this article is really quite lengthy, but it has a lot of really good information in it. This is definitely something that as preppers we want to be looking at, because if we start seeing this meter going up, I mean, it's already like right near the top, in the deepest red it can go. But if we see more talk about this Iran threat Geiger counter, then we definitely want to be just taking stock of our preps and having a look and making sure everything's stowed away and as good as it possibly can be at the time, I mean, there's going to be lots of situations like this. you know, there's this threat, there's that threat. There's definitely markers and things that we want to be looking at as preppers, which motivates us to actively get into our preps. Once stuff hits the fan, you can't correct anything that's gone wrong. And with Check Your Prep Months next month, you definitely want to be checking everything during that month and getting everything ordered, just so that you've got it. Now, obviously, there was the interview with Tucker Carlson and President Putin. The response from all of the Western mainstream media has just been absolutely abysmal. The way that they've responded to this is just unbelievable, and it's something that was going to happen at some point, you know, Putin talking to somebody in the Western media. But it seems like Tucker Carlson himself is drawing a lot of attention for doing it, and I think it's because the situation surrounding, you know, he was an ex-Fox News employee, he was basically fired, set up his own network, and then he gets and goes and interviews President Putin. They've been calling him a traitor, they've been calling on him to face travel restrictions, and absolutely just ridiculous talk, you know, that they've been picking apart the interview itself and what Putin's been saying. And they call this a diatribe. And let's just take a minute and look at the definition of diatribe. A bitter and abusive speech or piece of writing, ironic or satirical criticism, or a prolonged discourse. And, you know, I watched the full interview, and to be honest, I'd like to see the other leaders give a just over 2-hour talk to the Western media, because I can guarantee you there's at least one Western leader that wouldn't even get past 2 minutes. I'd like Tucker Carlson to talk to Zelensky, and I'd like him to talk to Biden, and then, you know, people can see. I think that's why the Western media is really upset the most about this interview, is that Putin is basically going to say things which they should have been reporting in the West, but they haven't been reporting. And this whole thing has opened up Putin to a whole larger audience. That's what they really don't like about it. I found this very interesting. The Starlink, which is Elon Musk's baby, he basically handed over control of it to the US Army, and he opened it up to the Ukraine to help them. Don't know how true this is, but apparently Russians are using the Starlink terminals in the Ukraine as well. Obviously, they've found some way to get around it and access the system, and Starlink themselves are basically saying that they haven't activated Starlink in Russia, the service won't work. They've never sold or marketed it, but, you know, there's ways around to buy anything, you know, that isn't meant to be bought in your country. I mean, they probably have to say it, you know, that they haven't offered the service to the Russians, but it seems that the Russians have found some sort of way around it if they are actually using it. I just thought it was quite interesting that both sides are using the same system, possibly. So this whole Hezbollah and Israel thing could really start a kick-off at any time, really, you know, to a very large degree. Much more elevated threat is in that region now. Lebanese Hezbollah says that they've targeted an Israeli military base in Golan Heights, and they've done it with dozens of rockets, a way to deplete the Iron Dome systems. And I'm going to show you a video which might support that. A few seconds of one of them and then a few seconds of the other, but it'll just give you an idea of what's been happening. This one here is the missiles firing and being intercepted by Iron Dome. They seem to be hitting them on a 1-to-1 ratio. And then this user here replies, and then there were no more interceptions. So if we look at this video, you can start to see the rockets actually impacting the ground, the ones that have been fired by Hezbollah. So it would seem that they're in the process of depleting the Iron Dome system with basic rockets. It could be a prelude to using more advanced weaponry on Israel, which would definitely be a more worrying thing. And remember, both sides have got military right up against the border, and they're actively engaging with each other daily. So a very tense and situation which could escalate very rapidly. That's the end of today's Prepper News. Thanks very much for watching. Be safe, be prepared, and I'll see you in the next broadcast. This has been Geordie Prepper, signing out.